Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. There's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. But we're going to start with this news out of Colorado. Most mature market in the country, as Todd Harrison shares, Colorado retailers sold more than $153 million worth of legal cannabis products in April, highlighting that the demand is still very strong for cannabis in legal states, even in some of the more mature markets. And if we follow this link, just wanted to share this to highlight that since January 2014 to date, Colorado, a state with a population of just 5.7 million people, and no doubt they do see a lot of tourism. Regardless, since Jan 2014, they've sold a cumulative $12.8 billion worth of cannabis, which is just mental when you think about it. And so that's why I like to think of Colorado as the blueprint and the foreshadowing of what we're going to see in other markets, especially markets with a much larger population as time goes on. And even so far this year, 2022 calendar year total, they've done $611 million after April's 2022 sales of 153. So nonetheless, just wanted to highlight strong sales out of the most mature market in the country. While we got this one from Beacon on Michigan, so thanks again, Todd, for sharing this one. As Michigan's quarter to date sales are up 24%, highlighting two of the MSOs that I think have the largest retail footprint in there, which is TerrAscend and Red, White, and Bloom. But with that, the Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency has reported that legal sales totaled $186 million in May, down 4% month over month from $195 million in April, but up 25% year over year from $149 million in May of 2021. And so there's more information if you wanted to read about the medical market and the breakdown of the sales as well, but that comes from Michigan. While we move over to this one from NJ.com, so we get another update. New Jersey legal weed to launch at 3 more stores as of this Wednesday today. So good to see the state expanding. Stores in Eatontown, Woodbridge, and Union that currently sell medical cannabis will launch legal cannabis sales at 10 a.m. Wednesday, or in 5 minutes from now, owner Air Wellness told NJ Advanced Media Sunday. So it seems like this is Air Wellness getting to launch those stores after the approval from the Cannabis Regulatory Commission a few weeks ago. And so mainly just to highlight that as of right now, the 3 stores means a total of 16 stores will be selling adult weed in New Jersey come Wednesday, so as of today. But I believe there are 2 more stores that will likely be coming online. So I'll update you when we get news on that. But just highlighting that the ball continues to roll and more dispensaries are opening in New Jersey, which is better after this long wait that we've had. And so with that, we have some news on SAFE based on what we reported on Sunday. And so wanted to share, this is what Jeffries, the investment firm, has to say about U.S. cannabis. So while Jeffries likely does have a lot more access to information than we do to make these judgment calls, do keep in mind that this is still just speculation. So take it with a grain of salt, but nonetheless, you can pause to read to see what Jeffries has to say about SAFE++ prospects, while I'm also just going to scroll down and read another snippet. So coming back to investment implications, to ensure uplisting and major institutional involvement, we also need to see capital market protections included in language. So while this is absent currently, there are a few considerations here. 1, the fact that they're potentially broadening the bill means that they could ultimately be included. And 2, if this is not the case, there is then the possibility updated FinCEN language is broader. And so we think the more comprehensive SAFE++, the greater the chance of this happening. And 3, and linked to the last point, even if FinCEN does not address capital market protections, we think for many institutions and even perhaps the exchanges, a broader bill passed beyond just SAFE could be enough for them to get comfortable, as it clearly illustrates the direction of travel of reform and materially lowers the risk profile. So did want to add that in for some context, because I think it is pretty sound in what they're saying there, but ultimately we don't know at the end of the day. So take that with a grain of salt, but that comes from Jeffries. Well, we got another one from Camilo at BTIG on U.S. cannabis, so thanks, Todd, for sharing this. Just going to highlight these main quotes here. We now believe Sen. Schumer has had a distinctly noticeable change of sentiment, such that no longer is SAFE passing the question being asked, but rather through what vehicle and with what else attached to it. And so that's obviously positive news compared to what we've been hearing so far. And so you can pause to read here. The line is so fine, walk carefully, senators. Has substantive meetings on SAFE plus hope signals progress on cannabis reform. So you can pause to read a little bit more information on that. And then as well, there's another snippet here, so you can pause to read from, of course, all the way down to the bottom. And so with that, I'm just going to scroll down to another snippet down here from Camilo at BTIG. Expect to see significant re-rating of depressed multiples for the U.S. MSOs once U.S. institutions can freely invest in the space, an event that is increasingly looking like it could happen this year. So again, speculation, take that with a grain of salt, but it is very promising to hear that, especially from some of these analysts, as they seem to be getting a little bit more excited at the prospect of reform. And so with that, we've also got Cowen on safe banking, so thanks, Todd, for sharing this one. Cannabis policy signs emerging of push to expand SAFE Act on cannabis banking. So You can pause to read what Cowen has to say, as this is Cowen, Washington Research Group. Well, I also got this one from Go Blue Canadian, apparently Cowen as well, on safe and inclusion of capital market access. And so this is an email industry news update that they seem to get from Cowen, so it's likely a different source, but mainly just wanted to share this if you wanted to read it and just compare it to what you already know. But highlighting at the bottom, we believe it will be difficult to include capital markets access as part of this package as it detracts from the public safety message. They also believe that the inclusion of SBA access will make it tougher to create political support for capital markets, as both deal with funding state legal cannabis businesses. And so there's a lot to take in. Obviously, try to weigh the pros and the cons of all these new developments. But with that, just trying to share all the relevant information that I can. And with that, it's also positive to highlight that at least some mainstream article outlets, or mainstream media outlets like The Hill, for example, are starting to talk about this a little bit more, as opposed to only seeing Marijuana Moment or others, as the Dems eye cannabis bill as vehicle for justice measures. And so again, still early. We already know that this is happening, but they're at least relaying it to their audience. Senate Democrats are eyeing a cannabis banking bill that has bipartisan support as a potential vehicle for long-sought restorative justice measures. So the tone is changing, though. They're considering using the banking bill to stuff a lot of social justice measures into it. And so again, I'm not going to go too deep into this because this is what we already know, but just happy to share that this is coming from The Hill. This news is getting some exposure, which we do love to see. And so from other snippets, Todd Harrison sharing, not sure where this one comes from, but Ascend and Air Wellness have been winners in Q2 without requisite stock gains. Viridian Capital. So my apologies there. Viridian Capital Advisors shares these snippets, highlighting that they believe Ascend and Air Wellness have been winners in Q2, valuing both in line with peer groups 2022 and 2023 multiples. And so just sharing this if you were interested and wanted to get a little bit more insight on Ascend or Air Wellness, if these are two companies that you happen to notice and have become interested over time. And so with that, you can get what Viridian Capital Advisors has to say. You can pause to read, and this is as of June 14th. Another snippet here you can pause to read as well. And then we got this one, another one from Todd Harrison, highlighting note from a sales desk this AM. And so I do not know who this is from, or, so take this with a grain of salt as well, as this is mostly speculation, but this is mostly a thread on Verano. Verano, buy the stock, coming from, again, someone that Todd knows on the sales side. That's really all the information we have, but it seems like they're making as much of a case as possible why they think Verano is a buy. And so obviously you can pause to read for all the information down here. And fortunately, they do put a lot of evidence to support their claims here. So that's obviously a benefit. But so you can pause to read here about Verano if you're interested. Well, we've got some news from Nats Fertig, who is a writer for Politico. And while she has been fairly quiet as of late, it is good to see her making a bit of noise again, as there's a bit more talk and rumbling in Washington around cannabis. But with that, new co-sponsor alert. Senator Booker signed on to co-sponsor the Veterans Medical Cannabis Safe Harbor Act, which would allow vets to use, transport, and possess cannabis, and to talk about it with a VA physician. And so obviously this should have been passed a long time ago, a bill like this, but I also think it's quite pathetic that the majority of senators are not lining up to support something like this, because at this day and age, the veterans need care the most, especially out of any Americans, veterans that helped fight to maintain the freedom. They should be getting the care that they've needed for a very long time. And so while Booker is signing on to this and we have a co-sponsor, it's again, I think it's pathetic that we just don't have the majority of senators lining up to try and show support to Americans where they deserve it the most. And with that, though, another update from Natalie Fertig, as a fascinating court case is developing out of New Mexico. And so while this is still very early, and I will share some developments as well, I really hope there is some sort of Supreme Court ruling that the current laws are unconstitutional, because that would be the biggest catalyst, and we would love that. But for a bit more detail, while it's still early, medical patients and a medical cannabis company in New Mexico are suing health insurance providers, including Cigna and Blue Cross, for not covering medical cannabis. And so, again, this is just great exposure for cannabis, and ultimately just highlights how silly the current discrepancy is between federal and state laws and why they ought to be corrected sooner than later. So great to see New Mexico taking a stand, and some companies and patients fighting back as well. Well, we've got some more state news. This one, Tom Engel shares that Maine regulators released a report highlighting the successful launch of the state's legal cannabis market. Good job, Maine. Glad you're seeing the benefits already, finding that sales by licensed businesses are displacing the illicit market more rapidly than has occurred in other legalized states. And so I'm not exactly sure if that's how Maine happened to legalize it, but there's more information in the story here if you wanted to find out how Maine is successfully riding this wave, and they plan to continue to do so. Well, we've got this one from Todd Harrison sharing that a poll found 83% of Nebraskans support legalizing medical cannabis. And so while this is not adult use cannabis, medical cannabis for Nebraskans is still a step in the right direction, and so this does leave the stage set for a ballot initiative in 2022. So I know that that is underway. Hopefully I can provide you an update in the future that Nebraska will be voting for medical cannabis, along with Maryland. I think Maryland is the only state as of right now, but we do have many other states that are trying to get this question on the ballot for November, for when that time comes around as well. So I will update you, but happy to share that. While West Virginia advocates are collecting signatures for decriminalization ballot measures. So while decriminalization sounds great in theory because you're not charging anyone or putting people in jail for cannabis, it still does not address the black market problem, which is obviously best challenged and threatened by a legal adult use market that you could launch along with decriminalization that is going to actually help your state thrive. But nonetheless, it seems like West Virginia is making progress and taking steps in the right direction. They are on track to collect the required signatures for its decriminalization effort by July 14. And either way, if you've made small medical changes and then you're taking the step to decriminalize before adult use, still a step in the right direction, West Virginia. So good job, and hopefully you can get the signatures required. While we've got this interesting news out of Kentucky from Marijuana Moment, as Kentucky governor issues medical cannabis executive order creating advisory committee to study patient access options. And I cannot think of a greater waste of resources than something like this. But if this is what it takes for them to make any change, then sad case for Kentucky. But the news is the governor of Kentucky has named members to a medical cannabis committee that will conduct public hearings on the issue and advise the governor on ways he can advance patient access while the legislature refuses to enact reform. And so I suppose he's doing this because the lawmakers in the state refuse to represent the people and what they want. And so it's fair if this is all he can necessarily do and this is the next best step, fair enough. But it's just funny that Governor Andy Beshear made the announcement on Tuesday issuing an executive order to put 17 experts. You're going to pay 17 experts? You only need to pay like 3 or 5 on the panel that will soon be traveling the state to learn more about the public views towards medical cannabis legislation and diving into various aspects of issue. Just seems like too many people to be paying an excessively large salary to. But polling suggests 90% of Kentucky adults support legalizing medical cannabis, while at the same time, far too many in our state who could benefit from it are suffering, Beshear said in a press release. And so obviously this makes him look good compared to his opponents. More of a political ploy than actual victory for cannabis, but just sharing that as it is a little bit of good news out of Kentucky, a state that is so far very adamant still against the plant. But with that, a bit more stories as Todd Harrison shares U.S. cannabis insider buying. So I don't exactly know who the source is, but additional insider buying continues in a 3-week trend as apparently Air Wellness Director Edward Miles purchased another 4,000 shares last week after picking up 9,000 shares the prior week. Similarly, Columbia Care CEO Nick Vita purchased over 10K shares on June 2nd to 3rd after buying 25,000 shares on May 20th, while James Clark, a director of Columbia Care, also picked up 25,000 shares as they are very, very cheap at this point in time, while TerrAscend executive chair Jason Wild purchased another 5,000 shares as well. And so just highlighting that insider buying is very positive for us to see, and while all the markets are going through some difficult red times at the moment, we are very happy to see that at least cannabis executives and insiders are buying, giving us a bit more confidence as well in our investments and in the assets we own. While some big news, not there yet, but still another study highlighting that cannabis does not belong in the Schedule 1 classification where it's been since the 70s. And this is why it ought to be removed, because another study found that extracellular vesiles of cannabis with high CBD content induce anti-cancer signaling. I don't know exactly what this means. This is likely more complicated than this, but if anything can induce anti-cancer signaling, it's probably worth looking into, and it might not be very profitable for Big Pharma, and that's why we haven't descheduled it yet, unfortunately. But if CBD can help induce anti-cancer signaling in human hepatocellular carcinoma. So you can learn more about this study here at this link, of course, if you're interested. But I'm just happy to share that week over week, we're getting more studies and more data highlighting what we already know, that cannabis is an effective medicine that can likely substitute a lot of what people are using opioids to treat. Things like pain, inflammation, sleep, and others. So just to highlight that, obviously that's why Big Pharma is terrified and they want to delay this as long as possible. But also the sooner that we can shift the perspective towards cannabis from a drug or the devil's lettuce, something bad that's worth criminalizing, to a plant that we ought to study more and that used in moderation can be very beneficial. The sooner we make that change, the sooner the world sort of, I think, will come back into balance. And with that, though, some great global news as Todd Harrison shares Germany moves ahead with plan to legalize cannabis sales. So still very early, but happy to get this announcement out of usnews.com as the German government is setting in motion plans to legalize the sale of cannabis for recreational purposes, aiming to have legislation ready in the year's second half. And so I think that will make headlines and make some big waves. And so with this, I think dominoes are continuing to fall, and we just need the patience, and I'm just hoping I get more time so that I can save up more so that I can eventually accumulate. And so again, we don't know how long these prices will stay, but I think this is a very big news that should not be underscored, and we'll see the shockwaves of this come in time when they finally release that in the second half of this year. But some more news breaking as Brazil Supreme Court authorizes citizens to grow medical cannabis. So while this isn't a blanket unconstitutional ruling, which we would love to see similar to Mexico, although that hasn't really panned out like we thought it might, it is good to see Brazil taking steps in the right direction. As the sixth panel of the Superior Court of Justice of Brazil authorized 3 people to grow cannabis for medicinal purposes, reported Antagonista. And the Superior Court of Justice decided Tuesday, June 14th, to grant 2 safe conducts that advance the regulation of artisanal cannabis cultivation in Brazil. So why does this matter though? Because the case could and should serve as a precedent for lower courts and the advance of cannabis legalization in the potentially huge market of 200 million people. And all that to say is if 2 people get permission to grow medical cannabis that happen to be medical cannabis patients, why wouldn't all other medical cannabis patients then want the same rights to be able to grow homegrown cannabis? And so while this doesn't mean much now, it's like the first step in building a bigger case in order to, getting these rights expanded for all medical cannabis patients. And so with that though, just to update you that the use of medical cannabis was legalized in Brazil in 2015, but until now patients could only obtain imported medicinal cannabis products with strict authorization from Anvisa, the National Sanitary Surveillance Agency. And in 2019, Brazil became the 3rd Latin American country to regulate the sales of medical cannabis products after Uruguay and Colombia. So good to see progress out of here. But nonetheless, while it doesn't change much, it is good to see this precedent set, as it'd be great if more medical patients wanted to get this right and started to challenge the Supreme Court as well, or the courts in Brazil, and which could lead to other potential reform efforts. And with that, the last story we got, thank you Todd for sharing, is apparently Uruguay will present a project to legalize the sale of cannabis to foreigners to help the tourism sector. And so while Uruguay was one of the first countries to legalize cannabis for adult use, they don't make it available for tourists in their country. It's only for the citizens of Uruguay, which is an interesting approach, but apparently Uruguayan officials are trying to end the important crisis it is suffering. And so I imagine this is a step in the right direction, but when was the last time you heard someone say that they went to vacation in Uruguay? So I don't know if this is necessarily going to help. Probably easing some of the really tight regulations that are likely causing this crisis that it's suffering is likely the best bet to help the citizens of Uruguay and to help their cannabis industry rebound. But with that, I just wanted to share this interesting story as we are seeing some efforts around the globe. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great day, everybody.